Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Back to the Basics, an Introduction to Environmental Monitoring. I have just a few housekeeping notes and community guidelines to mention. If you have any sound or technical issues today, please let us know in the chat box with a direct message. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be sent out to all registrants within the next week or so. And we ask that you just hold each other with mutual respect, come to this space teachable, and stay engaged with the presenters throughout this program. And now I just want to share a bit about the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services for New York. DHPSNY, as we like to call it, is a collaboration between the New York State Archives and the New York State Library, with services provided by the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. DHPSNY is a statewide program that provides free planning and education services to support the vast network of collecting institutions such as archives, libraries, historical societies, museums, and other organizations that safeguard and ensure access to New York's historical records and library research materials. DHPSNY services include archival needs assessments, preservation and condition surveys, strategic planning assistance, foundational planning assistance, and access to a variety of educational programs, such as this webinar today. To learn more about our services, please visit DHPSNY.org. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Kelly and Chris to get us started.
I had to get the access to the menu back, but hello everyone. I'm really excited to be with you all today, especially as I've participated in DHPSNY programs in the past and have always found them to be extremely helpful and informative. So hopefully we can do the same for you all. Today we're just going to be doing a sort of an introduction to environmental monitoring. So just kind of scratching the surface of what a program would look like and why you might undertake one, and then we can always build on that in the future. But I just wanted to introduce myself and Christopher, the other speaker here, and Chris has said I can go ahead and introduce him as well, so I will to the best I can. So Chris founded Sustainable Heritage about a year ago, and his background is in HVAC and facilities management. He's currently a facilities manager, but prior to that, we both worked at the Image Permanence Institute on the environmental consulting team. Worked with, I think it was over 60 institutions across the country, so a very wide variety of climate types and buildings and collection needs, so and then many more through education and research initiatives. So that's kind of where he's coming from and how we know each other. I'm Kelly Krish, and my background is on the collection side. So I trained as a conservator and also worked at IPI, and I'm now at the National Museum Cardiff in the UK. So go ahead and we have our email addresses there, and they'll be shared as well later on. So I think this will be kind of a recurring theme, but also to say that we're always very happy to talk about this or other preventive or sustainability topics. So please feel free to reach out at any time. All right, so the goal for today, as I said, it's kind of just an introduction to monitoring. So we're going to start by explaining the environmental parameters. In this context, by environment, primarily referring to temperature, relative humidity, and dew point. And not only what they are, but also why we should care, how they can potentially cause damage to collections. And then from that, how they would maybe get in your collection space and what you might be able to do about it. And then ending with how you can measure it. So putting in that monitoring program so that you can begin to understand where the risks might be and what those risks are. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask now or save them for the end of the webinar, or even, like I said, follow up through email later on. Happy to try to address those. So in terms of why we might want to improve a collection environment, I'm going to guess that probably a lot of the people on today's webinar are coming from a collections background. So temperature and relative humidity are two of the ways that two of the factors that can cause deterioration in collections. And so by addressing this, we're hoping to prolong the lifespan of our collections so that they can be around for now and for future generations for access and research and such. The other bit of that is often we can improve our environmental management in ways that are not only good for the collection, but also improve sustainability. And I think in today's day and age, with energy costs and climate change, that's a pretty big interest to a lot of institutions to try to get some sustainability gains where they can, and often environmental management can be a major one. And then those kind of inform the capital investments and strategic planning. So a lot of times changes to the building or to HVAC systems, investments in different types of collection storage, those can all kind of fit into a long-term plan for an institution of how you're going to achieve those goals. And finally, I just wanted to mention that collections environments can really be one of those areas that kind of bring an institution together. Often you're working across departments and building some connections with, if you're at a small institution, it might be, the same people that you're working with to achieve a lot of the goals. If you're at a larger institution, it could be some new faces involved. But one of the things we found, especially post-COVID when we were surveying institutions, was that places that had strong environmental management were able to respond better during COVID and presumably in other situations as well, because they had the relationships and the methods and the data collection and all that stuff in place. So they were able to not only function well under normal circumstances, but also adapt quickly and be more resilient under much more trying circumstances as well. So helps to kind of build in that resilience. Okay, so getting into those goals then, in terms of environmental parameters. We'll start with temperature. This is the speed of molecules. It's probably easiest to visualize if you think of a pot of water on the stove, and as you increase the temperature, you're adding heat to those molecules and they start to move faster and faster. And as it cools down, of course, they're slowing. From an energy perspective, this is relatively easy to control or influence. Usually, when we're looking at environmental data from places, it tends to be that of the parameters, temperature is usually the one that tends to be more within their desired goals, and kind of showing more control. It is hard to control temperature through some passive measures. So usually with exhibit cases or storage boxes, those don't tend to do a lot to slow down temperature changes. But there are a number of ways to kind of prevent high inappropriate temperatures from causing damage to collections. Otherwise, as well as active control and ways to do so in more energy savings ways. From a preservation perspective, the reason we care is that this is the primary driver for chemical decay, or what's referred to as natural aging. This is irreversible. So at higher temperatures, it's going to occur faster, but at lower temperatures, it just slows down. It can't really be reversed. And often the types of damage that it causes are really difficult to address through treatment even. So the impact can, if you think of any newsprint that's been stored in an attic or a particularly warm or uncontrolled space, you can see the visual impact where it might be yellowed, but also the structural if it's become embrittled. And both of those are kind of signs of the role of temperature in decaying objects. It can also influence other types of reaction. For example, pests tend to be more active at higher temperatures as well. And other things like pollutant damage or light damage tend to be worse at higher temperatures. So it's kind of a catalyst for those. It also can extend to more materials other than just what we might think of, other than organics, which would be your papers or taxidermy specimens. For example, if you have ceramics, sometimes they might be repaired with an adhesive that starts to soften at higher temperatures. And as it might soften, you might start have the pieces fall apart and could cause additional damage. So what are we really looking for here? Objects do equilibrate to temperature changes rather quickly. Usually it's a matter of a few hours or so at that. And so the main goal is to avoid keeping temperatures high for long periods of time. That said, we definitely want to make sure that it makes sense in the context and seasonally. Not everywhere in the country is going to have the same goal for cooling. Probably what is cool in Arizona is not necessarily what you might expect for cool in Wisconsin. And then in terms of seasonally, I know a lot of people here from New York State. So sometimes we've seen data, for example, where they might be cooler actually in the summer in a collection space because the air conditioning is running, and actually warmer in the winter time because heat is going. And so that's kind of unfortunate from a sustainability perspective, but also loses out on an opportunity to benefit from those lower temperatures during winter to improve preservation. Relative humidity, I'm not going to talk about what it is too much until we get to dew point, because I think that helps to have it make more sense. But just to say that it is a measure of the water vapor content. And in general, especially compared to temperature, it's harder to control and definitely more energy intensive. This tends to be where, your dehumidification or humidification, where we're using more energy. From a preservation perspective, in terms of how it can damage collections, moisture is needed for a number of reactions, and the more moisture that's present, the more of that reaction can occur. It can also make other forms of deterioration worse. So again, at higher levels of relative humidity, we do often see more pest activity, and again, pollutant, light damage, all of those things can be made worse at higher levels of relative humidity. Some objects may be more sensitive than others, and for example, archaeological glass or certain mineral specimens, for them, it might be damaging to even be above 45%, for example. And for those of you who might be within an historic structure, controlling relative humidity can be where you might run into issues with balancing the needs of the collection with that of the historic envelope. So if you've ever seen salts forming on the bricks, or if they happen to be painted, it starts to flake off or bubble. That's the moisture moving through that building envelope to, if you're humidifying inside and it's dry outside, it's going to try to move towards that outside. And if it's damp outside and dry inside, it's going to try to move indoors. So you'll start to see that formation. And not only is it a loss of conditions, which we don't want to see, but it's also damaging to the structure. Finding the right balance there, especially with historic envelope, can be is definitely something to consider. Okay, I did briefly want to touch on 3 particular ways in which relative humidity can cause damage to collections. These are the primary ones that we think about when we talk about RH damage. And the first one is mechanical. And this really has to do with as materials absorb moisture, they're expanding, and as they lose moisture, they shrink. And if this is done past the point at which, if you think of a rubber band, you can stretch it, but if you stretch it too far, it breaks. So if we build up too much strain or stress within an object or exceed what its natural capacity is to kind of rebound, then we can get cracks, for example, and damage in that way. So you might see it, especially in anything that's restrained. So if books are packed really tightly on a bookshelf, and they're absorbing moisture, they kind of want to open up, and if they're packed tight, you might see them kind of pop their bindings and you get splits down the spine. Another way you might see it, for example, in this image, is if you have furniture, when it tries to contract, for example, if there's metal nails in it, it may not be able to. That metal is not allowing it to go any further. It builds up stress, and so you get a crack forming to try to alleviate that. There's biological decay. Often we primarily think of mold. It's something we're trying to avoid in our spaces, or it's related to mildew. But there's also pests, and these both are primarily driven by moisture, but temperature can play a role. And particularly when we're talking about mold, some of the main places to look for this can be exterior walls, particularly if they're not insulated. We can see mold germinate there, and anywhere where there's a microclimate, which really I just mean if it's a place that tends to be in particular cooler than the rest of the space or with less airflow, those tend to be the areas that are more prone to microclimates, and that's why we always encourage good airflow throughout a room. Finally, metal corrosion. Won't say too much about this except to say that sometimes metals are part of more objects than we may traditionally think of, and at higher levels of relative humidity, metals corrode faster. Okay, so what to look for? On the plus side, objects do equilibrate to relative humidity changes relatively slowly. So while it's expensive to control and can be difficult, their objects just aren't as quick to respond to those changes. And then in this case, those exhibit cases and storage boxes, those actually can be quite effective at slowing and buffering those changes, as well as high density storage. I also want to say what we're also usually looking for is to keep the relative humidity generally between 30 to 60%. And you'll just see, I kind of wanted to explain where that's coming from, but this is some data from a study that was done actually in the 90s, but you can see here the response of the different components of a painting to changing levels of relative humidity. And the reason that 30 to 60 range is usually selected for collections is that that's where the response is the lowest. So the change in that slope is the smallest possible within that range, and you can see how it really starts to go up quickly once you start getting 80% or up, or 20% or below. So from a mechanical perspective, that's usually a good range. Additionally, once you start getting above 65, 70%, start to see the mold risks and other things. However, it should also make sense for the context. So if your collections have previously been in largely 20 to 40%, and that's what they've lived in, it actually can be quite damaging to then expose them to a 50 or 60% relative humidity environment. So it's really important to take into account the environmental history of the collection and what that looks like before kind of putting those parameters in place. Okay, now moving on to dew point, which is the third and final parameter. This is usually the one that people are the least familiar with, but can kind of unlock the key to understanding some of the environmental data later on. So it's actually the point at which condensation forms. And so it's not warm where I am today, but it probably is in New York. So if you go outside with a cool drink and you get that water forming on the outside of the glass, that's because across the dew point temperature and condensation is formed. I find this to be a really helpful graphic from the Image Permanence Institute because it kind of relates the three parameters of dew point, temperature, and relative humidity. And so if you think of the easiest way to kind of think about it is this: you maintain a constant dew point. So if there's, that's the amount of moisture that's in those containers. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but going across, they all have the same amount of moisture present. So the dew point's the same in all these situations. But as we increase the temperature, that container gets bigger, and warmer air can hold more moisture. So that container is getting bigger. And as the container gets bigger, but the amount of water in it stays the same, the relative amount of space that water is taking up decreases. So that's what you can see these relative humidity numbers at the bottom here. The relative humidity is decreasing as we increase temperature, and vice versa. As we decrease temperature, relative humidity goes up. So another way you can kind of look at the relationship between these three parameters is there's a free website called dpcalc.org, and you can kind of use these sliders to see how they respond at different levels. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that how they're impacting the preservation environment in the collection. Another way I kind of have thought about it in the past is if you're going on a trip and you have a certain amount of money, You can spend so much on lodging or so much on food, but your budget for that trip is kind of your dew point. It's that fixed amount that you have. And some people might choose to spend more money and stay at a hotel that's closer to center of town. Others might decide that they don't mind staying further out, but they want to eat at really nice restaurants. And so that's kind of where you come to this balance between temperature and RH, that when you have that fixed dew point, you can raise the temperature and it's going to drop the RH, but not every combination is going to be possible at every dew point. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's, hopefully that's a helpful metaphor, but that's kind of how the three are related. Are there any questions? I don't know if I don't think I can see while I'm sharing, but Amanda, just go ahead and interrupt if there are. I'll just quickly go over this, but it's just to say that dew point can really answer a lot of questions. Often, if you compare what's happening outside your building to what's happening inside, you'll see that the building's offering some level of buffering against moisture, keeping some of that moisture out. So outside might be going really high or fluctuating a lot, and you'll get a more gradual version happening inside just naturally, even without any mechanical control. The more mechanical control you have, though, the greater the difference is going to be between what's happening outside and what's happening inside. And that's kind of illustrated in the graph on the right there in a very simplified form, that the closer to that purple line you are, that's kind of showing a seasonal swing. Often it's pretty jagged. That tends to be a more natural type of dew point, showing not as much sign of control, whereas that blue line that's flatter is indicating quite a bit of control, either through really effective passive measures or really tight mechanical control. And then I'll just say too, so this is one way you can see if your humidification or dehumidification is working well. You can see if spaces are being served by the same mechanical systems or not, whether your mechanical system might be failing in its dehumidification abilities, all kinds of things, or if a leak is actually causing the relative humidity to go up. And some of those things I kind of tried to illustrate with the second graph there. If you imagine the orange to be, say, the outside conditions, and then the yellow and blue lines to be within a room, you can see that the yellow and blue seem to match pretty closely. They have the same dew point signature, we would say. They're probably served by the same mechanical system. And so that's just an example. So I'll just kind of conclude my section by saying that in terms of our current understanding of collection needs, that often in the past, we've been focused on a 70-50% mentality, which is really nice for human comfort, but is not always optimal for the long-term storage of all materials. A lot of things really do benefit from cooler temperatures to slow that degradation and to have the relative humidity within a safe range. So it's just to say that prioritizing flatlining, so having that perfectly straight line when you do your environmental monitoring, isn't necessarily the goal. It can be quite costly, and it doesn't necessarily indicate that preservation of the object or an historic structure is being achieved. So there's a little bit, there's a lot of factors that go into play with that, but we can get into more of that with Chris's section. So Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. All right, I just got to bring my slides up. So there we go. So before we go into where to place data loggers, now we want to go over some things that are going to impact your collection spaces, some things that are really going to potentially cause issues or be factors in really what's going to create that collection environment. First and foremost is going to be your building envelope. Your building envelope is going to be what basically your walls, your roof, your floor, what's going to create the framework, if you will, for your collection space. They are critically important. If there's holes in the building envelope, they're going to have a major impact. One of the things I took an architectural class a few years ago, a couple of architecture classes a few years ago, one of the things that they stressed in that class, first and foremost, right out of the beginning, is that if you take a brand new purpose-built structure, even 2023 standards, and you add up all the little gaps and holes around the frame of that building, you're going to come up with a 3-foot by 3-foot hole in the side of the building. So there's little holes and gaps everywhere, and those are going to let air into your space, unconditioned air, uncontrolled air, possibly even pests. So you want to, go through your space, make sure it's sealed as tight as possible. One thing we really stress is not leaving doors open in a collection space. We see that a lot. There's collection space that they're trying to condition to say 65 degrees. And when staff come in, start working in the room, they'll prop the door open so that they can work in there. And when they prop it open, that condition is literally going right out the door. So the mechanical system then has to make up for the air that it's losing. So, and then your building envelope also comes down to insulation layer levels and vapor barriers. So those are all going to play a major factor. If you have poor insulation, solar loads are going to equate to heat on your space or loss of heat in your space. Also, vapor barrier, if there's a poor vapor barrier, that's what Kelly was talking, you get the efflorescence, the buildup of salts on the walls, and that's the moisture moving one way or another, that it's taking the salt with it from the stones. So we stress, if you're getting into collecting, you want to start a data collecting, you want to start a data monitoring program, is first and foremost is knowing the history of your space, knowing what it was used for, knowing what its past was. It's going to point out a lot of issues in your space you may not have previously been aware of. Things like your building envelope, airflow, mechanical system. I tell everyone there's some things that you may learn. Worked with a collection space that was once a car dealership, and that car dealership was, as you would expect, human comfort. They weren't worried about collection preservation. They were worried about making the customers comfortable while they were in there looking at cars. So what comes with that is, mechanical systems that are just designed for human comfort, or a building envelope, no longer is a car dealership. Now they're using it for collection storage, and they can't achieve good collection storage conditions. It's because the mechanical systems were never designed to achieve that. And when they moved in, they cut corners, they did a lot of value engineering, we call it, and they, didn't really upgrade things, and they're using older, not designed for collection mechanical systems. So they're resulting in those issues. And this goes across the board. We see this a lot. We've seen rifle ranges that have become collection storage, cisterns, apple storage rooms, even in some cases, roller skating rinks and things like that. So with all those, what was the past of the space? What is it being used for now? What may or may not have been changed? And it gives you a lot of ideas. Like if I'm using a cistern, remember it was meant to hold water. That could come with issues like high moisture content in that collection space. If you're going to evaluate your space as well, it's good to have an infrared camera. In the past, these used to go for thousands. Now they've actually, the price is coming down significantly, $200 to $800. You can actually pick these up off Amazon. There's a few different brands. There's some standalones that are handheld that'll Bluetooth to your phone. There's ones that will plug into your phone, and there's even small individual handhelds. And they're even making some other design ones that are moisture meters and infrared cameras as well. Great for finding things like cold spots, hot spots in your building, phantom heat loads. If you have a hot or cold wall, you don't understand what's going on, this could give you a good idea of, is it a water leak? Is it a leak in the envelope? Good way to really identify those issues quickly. When you're starting a data analysis, it's also good to collect outside air data. Most software, and we'll go into different kinds of software in a minute, will allow you to bring in outside air data. It's critical to compare what's happening outside to what's happening inside. So being able to look at that outside air data is going to tell you, okay, well, I had a cold period outside and my temperature dropped. I had a really hot day, my temperature spiked. The dew point climbed outside. It also climbed in my space. Knowing that information will tell you how well your building envelope's performing, how well your mechanical system is performing, and really how sustainable you can be. Really important thing to look at with outside air is if you compare outside air to inside air in your collection space, and you have a period of a long power outage, say maybe a day or 2 days, it's good to look at that outside air to your inside space and see how well did my envelope hold, and that'll help you identify how well you may be able to incorporate like a system shutdown within your collection space. So there's really good data to be gained by comparing that outside to your space. Also looking at your mechanical system, it's good to know what that mechanical system is capable of. I tell everyone we're not looking for you to be, an HVAC technician or engineer, but just get an idea of, what when we think of cooling, how cold or what type of dew point are you expecting to reach on that? Kelly was talking about dew point earlier. It's critical to understanding a collection space. What types of dew point can we expect from the system? What type of heating, relative humidity, being dehumidification or humidification. Make sure we're on you're got a good understanding of that. We have worked with a few institutions where collection staff have told us from the beginning, we're called in for a project and the collections staff says, well, we can't achieve this or can't achieve that. And the end of the day, it's mainly because they were not understanding what their mechanical system was capable of. So just getting that understanding helps you know what your mechanical system is capable of, helps you ask for the right conditions from your facility staff. So you don't really request something that's outside of its capabilities. Your layout of spaces is good to know as well. Understanding where your collections are. How are they dispersed across a collection space or across a facility? How are your what's the arrangement of spaces? Do you have a mechanical system that is serving collection spaces as well as offices, or collection spaces as well, say the director's office, which again, we've seen scenarios like that. One mechanical system trying to create cool conditions for collections, but also serving the director. At the end of the day, the director's concerns outweigh what the collections are. And if they're too cold, they'll ask for the temperature to be bumped up. And you wind up losing that cool condition that you could gain for your collection or for your collections. Also looking at where do you have environments that need no form of conditioning, loading docks in relation to spaces, getting a good idea for how they're laid out. When you do that, you might be able to say, hey, I have collections, 4 or 5 different locations across the building. I may be able to consolidate them all to, a north side, all on the same air handling unit in this wing. And readjust spaces so that you can save energy by conditioning them with one unit. And remember, there's some things there, distribution of rooms impacts environmental conditions, but adding walls to rooms is going to interfere airflow. We see this a lot in museums or, in even libraries as well, where we want to redesign a room, we'll put a wall right down the center, but we now have a thermostat on one side of the room and the diffusers on the other. So the diffusers are putting out environmental conditions that aren't going to get to the thermostat and satisfy the thermostat. And also keep in mind, as you look at these spaces, rooms on the south, rooms on the south side of a building may be warmer than rooms on the north side of the building. And this just goes to what we were discussing earlier. Different types of spaces are going to require different conditions. There's going to be storage conditions, exhibit conditions, and even no conditions. Storage may want cooler, controlled relative humidity. Exhibit may be get away with human comfort, that 68 to 72 degree range, still controlling that relative humidity. And then you'll get into no conditions, things like loading docks that can just go, I say little to no conditioning whatsoever. When you look at your spaces, also understand occupancy is a major contributing factor to what happens in your environment. People add heat to their space as they're in there. We have seen a local museum when we looked at it, where they were heating to about 72 degrees in the wintertime, and as an energy saving strategy, we asked them to back it down to 68. And when they backed that down to 68 degrees, they had such a high occupancy from visitors in their museum that just the presence of people, a high number of people, raised the temperature in the space back up to, I think it was about 70 degrees. So just the body heat from staff in this very large museum, or body heat from visitors in this very large museum, was artificially raising that temperature up to 70 degrees. And people also, as they walk around, their breath is going to add moisture to the air as well. So you're going to have to compensate both ways for that. And if you're adjusting any mechanical systems or any shutdowns to, try and implement strategies, remember that you want to keep in mind not just the occupancy of visitors, but staff operating schedules as well. And you look at your collection spaces. If you don't have great conditions and you're concerned, remember storage, furniture, and housings can play a huge factor. Things like cabinets, vitrines, compact shelving boxes. The more buffered a collection is, the more we can put it in boxes or store like larger amounts together, say books packed tightly on a shelf. The more buffered the collection is, the greater an impact it can have on the environment, its resistance to relative humidity changes. But it's especially more important being in those cabinets, in the vitrines, in compact shelving. We've seen instances where large changes in relative humidity in a room have occurred, where a room has changed 10 to 15% relative humidity over a day. And we've looked at data loggers that have been placed within cabinets, vitrines, and the cabinets themselves had only seen maybe a 2 or 3% change. So it gives a great amount of buffering. And I know Kelly has also recently been on a project where they did some research and found an older style safe had significantly buffered a collection during a collection in a historic house during some major relative humidity swings. So, you'd be amazed the impact that these types of systems can have. So if you're looking to get into environmental management, one thing we do recommend is starting an environmental management team, getting players from across your facilities, collection staff, administrators, anyone who works around the collection has a say in the space, has a say in the building, getting them involved and being at least part of that team. That way, if you have questions about the facilities, there's a member there. You have questions about the collection, there is a member there. So you got a broad grouping of people, and it's easier to get actions to happen with facilities if you keep them involved. If they're involved from the beginning and they know that you're having issues with X, Y, or Z, they know what to look for. They've been part of that. They've been in meetings, and they can help take action and help push things along. And having administrators along is also key. When they're aware of these problems from the beginning, it's not just thrown at them at the last second, where you say, hey, the humidifiers aren't working in this room. And they're like, well, we thought they were working before. They can actually come to these meetings and see, like, they look at the data with you, they see what the impact is, and they know what those problems are or what can be caused by the humidifier not working correctly. And they can also free up funds a little quicker if they know that there's a problem. So I'd like to give this slide. I worked with an EDCC a while ago, and they actually had these questions up there. I think they're really good. I tell everyone, if you're starting an environmental monitoring program, here's a good group of questions to ask of everyone. That's a good way to quickly learn, or in a way learn some information about the building. How old is it? Knowing the age of your building can let you know types of building envelope that may or may not exist, issues that may exist just within type of environment inside the building. Have there been renovations? When? By whom? Where? Did we split rooms up? Did we close rooms off? Did we close up windows? It's, again, just a good series of questions to ask around throughout the staff, and really get a good understanding of your facility. So we'll go into collecting environmental data, how to do it, and a few pointers behind doing so. So we've got our information about our building. We understand some of the damage. So now let's start collecting that data. If you're going to start an environmental monitoring program, a few questions to ask. What are you looking for? What questions are you looking to answer? Are you looking for microclimates? Are you trying to identify what rooms are the best within your institute? Are you just looking to get a baseline for your facility? What are you looking to change? Are you looking to make something better? Are you looking to save energy? Are you just looking to gain an understanding of what rooms are better for the collection around the space? I have ceramics. Are they better in this room than that room? Or are my paintings safer in, the north side than the south side? What answers are we looking for? What are we looking to change? And what spaces are you going to monitor? Are you going to monitor the whole facility and see if there are rooms that may be better that you are not aware of? And we actually have seen, abandoned server rooms or, old storage rooms that have had better conditions than currently used collection spaces in institutions. And we've made recommendations. You may be better off moving collections to that room because there's a better condition in that vacant room right there. Or are you going to monitor specific rooms? We have important collection items in these rooms. We don't have money for a ton of data loggers. Let's just get, in specific rooms. The types of data loggers you would use, entirely up to you. Many companies offer wireless. We know in this day and age, wireless is important. Data from most of these loggers can be uploaded remotely to the environmental software, and the cost is going to vary greatly. And then when you look at these loggers, I actually just worked with an institution that did a breakdown between the 7 major loggers out there: Visala, Onset, which makes Hobo, Conserve, Lascar, Hanwell. They went through all these data loggers to kind of, look at what's best for your institution and what works for you. One of the things I really want to stress is a lot of companies offer wireless data loggers. They're great. They'll work for you. You can pull data and not have to be on site. But we need to stress that you should still walk your collection spaces. You should still put eyes on it, make sure there's no issues, there's no problems. And then this way, if anything happens, you can be aware of it firsthand, because while loggers are great at collecting environmental data, they sometimes do not paint a whole picture of the space. And you can have just the slightest gap, slightest microclimate, and have a problem. So walking your collection space is still just as important as data logging. So we get asked a lot, where should I place loggers? Where do I put them? And the problem is that though there are guidelines, there's no specific rules, if you will. There's no hard set rules. You want to use your loggers for, if you're looking for general conditions, you can use loggers to compare environments inside a building, one room to another. You want to observe how the building and mechanical systems respond to seasonal change. You want to do your housings or cabinets buffer. So then if you want to check if a cabinet's buffering really well, you'll get a data logger within a room and then within the cabinet next to it. And then you get an idea for how well that cabinet's buffering those conditions. You can put them in mechanical systems and see the energy system your mechanical system is using and how that works. Or you can monitor specific collections. You're only worried about, a Picasso painting that's in your institution. So you can put it near there. You can look for microclimates if you have issues around windows. We've seen loggers put there. The general conditions to say you want to keep loggers. If you only get one, you want to keep it roughly the center of a room, about 3 to 5 feet up off or 3 to 6 feet up off the floor, about, chest to eye level. But again, use your judgment when you're putting those loggers in. What works best for you and what are you looking for at your institution? So again, where to place those loggers. Again, one at least, if you're looking one per collection space, 4 to 6 feet off the floor. You want to get the loggers where your collection lives. You want to put them where exactly where the collection is. If you don't want to put it opposite side of the room, because there could be a microclimate. You want to see almost exactly what that collection is experiencing where it lives. You can use the loggers again to do in-depth analysis, putting them inside mechanical systems to find mechanical issues. You can find what we call short circuiting in a scenario like that. The air is brought out of the exhausted out of the supply and brought right back into the return, doesn't even get into the collection space. You can find poor airflow where you think you're getting good airflow across a collection space, but you're not. Building issues. If you have a tall building, say 20-foot ceilings, you could end up with stratification with different conditions, say at the floor, in the middle, and the top of the building. Could find moisture heat loads you didn't know exist, or even gaps or problems of the building envelopes can be pointed out. The significance of those can be pointed out by getting loggers near those. So how long do you monitor space? We recommend leaving all data loggers in place for at least 6 months, preferably a year, but at least if you have to move it, you want at least 6 months worth of data. The point is you want to see seasonal changes in a collection space. You want to go from winter to spring, spring to summer, and summer to fall. So you want to see how those changes are occurring. If you're continuously moving a logger around a space from one room to another, we're not seeing those changes. We're not able to evaluate how that environment's changing. And what software will you use? There's multiple types of software. There's eClimate Notebook, there's Conserve, there's HoboWare. There are even a few smaller brands out there. The two prominent ones, eClimate Notebook and Conserve, both a good software, but just like data loggers, look into those, find what works best for your institution, what you like best for your institution, and it's easy to decide. Again, both eClimate Notebook and Conserve, even HoboWare, they're pretty easy to use, and but only right now Conserve and eClimate Notebook have the metrics with them to help identify and do data analysis. Some other tools that you can use when you're looking at a facility, your building management system. The building management system, the BMS, is the system that controls your mechanical systems. The computer that's telling it to turn off, turn on, change cooling, add humidification, things like that. You can, depending on the type of mechanical system you have, you can trend data. And if you can trend that data, you can bring out temperature and relative humidity data from across a mechanical system and import it into software, just like a logger point. So if you want to see the supply data from this system, the return data from this system, or what the cooling data looks like, some BMS systems allow you to what they call trend that data. You can export it as a CSV and bring that into eClimate or Conserves and look at that just like a data point. And it helps you. In some scenarios, you could use a thermostat in a room as a monitoring point for a collection space. When should you be looking at data? So you should at least every 2 weeks sit down with your team, try and go over data. If not, maybe, might stretch it out to a month depending on schedules, but really try and do it at least every 2 weeks. Sit down, look at that data. Are you seeing any issues? If you have major storms or weather event, if you have a hurricane come through your location, if you have, major thunderstorm, it doesn't hurt to look at the data and see, how did this impact my space? And again, one good useful piece of information are those power outages. If you have a power outage that's greater than 3 to 4 hours, even up to a day, look at that data. How did the environment hold within my facility? And that does help you paint a picture of, do I have options for energy saving? Can I shut mechanical systems down, save some energy over the long run? I'll wrap up with a few things. If you're interested in some grants or funding, there are a few options here. There's NEH grants, IMLS. There's AIC offers the CAP grants as well. In New York State, there is not New York State, but there's a database for incentive for renewable energy, the Desire. That's, you can break down by state. So if you're in New York State, you can break down Desire by state and by, I believe, county. And it'll tell you what incentives are available in your area for any kind of renewals or energy efficiency things, anything from sometimes light bulbs to replacing air handling units to solar panels. And there's the Frankenthaler as well. Some other resources, Kelly, you mentioned Image Permanence Institute. They have the publication, Sustainable Preservation Practices. It's good if you're, it's an older publication, but it's good if you're starting out learning how to do environmental management, as well as the Sustainable Preservation Practices Guide and in the role of dew point. If you're, want to understand dew point more, that definitely is a good handout there. Or Kelly is always happy to talk about dew point. I can tell you that from experience. So, I think yep, there, did skip one. And it doesn't like going back to it. If you want some extra help, if you want help establishing data monitoring program, there are some services we offer. Kelly and I do offer services helping, set up a data monitoring program. We can do environmental assessments. If you want to see, you are collecting data, but want to see how that looks in your environment, how your collection system, your spaces handle that, or want help optimizing mechanical systems, designing a new mechanical system, or even over time, mechanical systems get out of whack out of design from where they should have been. So we can also come back and come in and help you reassess your mechanical system and what we call preservation commissioning, bring everything back to where it should have been from the original design, or get ideas for where it should be. So I'll pass that over to if anyone has any questions. I will say while we wait, if for any reason anyone has a question they don't want to ask us directly, we're always available by email. Please feel free to reach out to either one of us. Let us know, what questions you may have and how, or, whatever you'd like. We're happy to answer whatever conundrum you may have.
Chris, there was a request in the chat. If you could go back to the resources page again. Thanks. I don't know if maybe if it was the resources or the grant. So if it's not this one, if you want, was the grant one also resources, Chris?
if you go to our webpage for lesscarmoreculture.com, we have links to these grants as well. I think everything but the Frankenthal I have a link to. I'll add that.
I'm not seeing any other questions. Amanda, do you want us to hand it back over to you for any concluding remarks?
Sure. I just want to say thank you to you both for a great presentation, and thanks to everyone for attending. And just a reminder that we will send the recording out to all of the registrants, so you'll have access to all of the information here in the next week or so. All right.
Great. Thanks, Amanda, and thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.